Canada, once a beacon of prosperity and natural beauty, is crumbling before our very eyes. The country that dazzled with its breathtaking landscapes and topped global livability rankings is now on the brink of economic and social collapse. But what's truly chilling is that Australia is hurtling down the exact same path. This isn't just a wake-up call, it's a deafening alarm. I'm Biko Konstantinos, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Did you know if you clean a vacuum cleaner, you become a vacuum cleaner? And if you want to hear some clean and highly polished financial content, don't bloody subscribe to me. But if you want some more random and from the heart type content, I might just be your man. So hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already, because together we're special like the original Star Wars trilogy.
Great shot, kid. That was 1 in a million.
Not like this woke and lame rubbish being served up today. And just like Disney movies have gone to the crapper, so has bloody Canada. So let's dive in. To help with this discussion, I'm going to be playing segments from different videos, including this one from Jack Chappell titled "Canada is Becoming a Dystopian Nightmare." And his title is very similar to my previous video on the Australian housing market. However, his video did get about 1 million more views than mine, which is hurtful, I'm not gonna lie. But you can help that.
I had been saying that housing costs had doubled under Justin Trudeau. It's now far worse than that.
All crimes are up across the country.
The city of Hamilton declared a state of emergency over homelessness.
Canada's in big trouble, but just like Australia, the root cause of this nightmare stems from turning housing into a commodity solely designed to create wealth rather than a safe and secure place for people to live. This has led to an overwhelming obsession with property in both countries, meaning that property owners have become exceedingly rich while non-property owners are being pushed towards poverty.
And just over there was where I used to live when I went to school in the area in 2016. I had a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom, 512 square foot apartment. The cost of rent? Well, that was $900 a month, including internet, electricity, and water.
That equates to about $210 per week.
However, earlier this year, I took a look at that same apartment that I rented out just 7 years ago for $900, and today it is being rented out for about $2,000 a month.
That's about $460 per week, and if you converted that to Australian dollars, would be around $500 per week.
Essentially, the rent has gone up 122% over 7 years, which is an average increase of about 17.4% per year. In fact, if you were to view this rental income as an investment, it would be very comparable to Ponzi schemes that we've seen in the past, like Bernie Madoff, who was giving 10 to 20% returns per year for about a decade or two.
I think a Ponzi scheme is the perfect description for the Canadian and Australian housing markets. Both countries rely heavily on continuous price increases and the influx of new buyers to sustain their value. Just like a Ponzi scheme, returns are paid to earlier investors from the capital of newer investors. Or in other words, young people have to buy extremely overpriced housing so that those who bought cheaply can make massive returns for doing absolutely nothing. House prices in both these countries are driven up by the expectation of perpetual growth. But just like a Ponzi scheme always collapses, overpriced and over-leveraged housing puts the entire economy at risk. Because if there was significantly reduced demand, latecomers into the market would be left with devalued assets and significant financial losses. But alas, both Canada and Australia seem 100% committed to keeping this Ponzi going. Now, when I think of Ponzi schemes, I think of scams. And one thing I'm always vigilant about is not being scammed online. And that brings me to today's sponsor of this video, NordVPN. VPN stands for Virtual Private Network, which is a service that encrypts your internet traffic and protects protects your online identity. The app, whether it's on your mobile device or personal computer, is clean and easy to use. My virtual location is currently set as Sydney, Australia, but I could easily set it to a city in America. So just like that, I'm connected to New York, USA. And being able to connect your VPN to other countries can allow you to access geography restricted content, or even allow you to stream different content on services like Netflix that you don't normally have access to in your own location. Now we've got a cracking deal for you. If you go to nordvpn.com/Bitco and sign up for 2 years, you get a massive discount on your standard VPN cost, 4 extra months for free, and up to 20 gigabytes of eSIM data on Nord's new service called Saily. Saily is an electronic SIM service that enables you to stay connected to the internet no matter what country you're in, and setting it up is simple. So go to nordvpn.com/Bitco, which you'll find in the description, and grab yourself an amazing deal, and you'll immediately become much safer online.
In 2015, the average Canadian paid $1,172 in rent, and today, just 8 years later, that number has jumped to $2,289.
So it's pretty much doubled in just 6 years.
And obviously, it's not just the rents that have skyrocketed, it's the sale prices as well of Canadian real estate. In 2011, the average sale price of a house in Canada was $348,000. 12 years later, prices have more than doubled to $709,000.
And the average house in Australia is a ridiculous $933,000.
In Toronto, the average house went from $500,000 in 2013 all the way up to $1.3 million in 2023.
And according to the Demographia Housing Affordability Report, Toronto has the 11th worst housing affordability, but Vancouver is classed as the 3rd worst, right behind Sydney, Australia. And this is the perfect example of hyper speculation into housing, creating ridiculous distorted house prices. I mean, Hong Kong you can sort of understand because there's so many people in such a small area, but why on earth has Canada and Australia blown up their housing bubbles when everyone needs safe and secure shelter, and affordable housing is the hallmark of a thriving society?
The average monthly mortgage on a new home purchase today is approaching $3,500 per month. And when you take into account that the average Canadian family only takes in about $5,000 per month after taxes, you can kind of see how we have a mortgage crisis going on in this country as well.
Basically, Canada and Australia have created a crisis for renters and new home buyers to the benefit of those who already own property. This has resulted in a two-class system where the haves, which are property owners who have minimal or no mortgages, are absolutely thriving financially, whereas the have-nots, which are renters and new home buyers with massive mortgages, find themselves struggling just to be able to survive. Now, both Canada and Australia already had some of the most expensive housing in the world before COVID, but then they did the unthinkable and made the housing crisis so much worse. Firstly, they flooded their economies with way too much stimulus, and when you have extra money floating around in countries obsessed with property, guess what happens? It all finds its way into unproductive housing. But then, to make matters so much worse, Canada and Australia went on a mass immigration bender.
But now we move on to the next topic, which is probably the hottest topic in the entire country right now, and that is Canada's population explosion.
And explosion is exactly what happened. This graph shows the Canadian population growth for people over 15 years old. And between 2007 and 2022, it averaged at 110,000. But just look what's happened in the last 2 years. That's not just a bit of extra growth. That's like turning on every immigration tap available and then just closing your eyes and waiting to see what happens.
At the moment, Canada is just shattering all of its immigration records and is actually taking in 3.5 times more immigrants per capita than high immigration countries like the United States.
And guess who followed this exact same immigration on steroids policy? It's Australia, because there's no way that Australia was going to allow Canadian house prices to get more expensive than ours, we gotta pump that housing Ponzi by any means necessary.
In a sense, the federal government had a great idea to bring in a record amount of immigrants during a time where there is a housing shortage and a lack of infrastructure to support the people that want to live here.
One of the dumbest ideas in history, if you ask me.
And so if Canada's population were to keep growing at this rate, it would be one of the fastest population growths in the history of the modern world.
So what's the consequences of going hell for leather on immigration? Well, countries typically love immigration because it boosts overall economic activity, or otherwise known as gross domestic product, because you've got more people buying more stuff and using more services, which grows the overall economy. But when it comes to economic growth per capita, or in this chart per person over 15 years old, you can see that economic growth per person is actually going backwards. Canada's GDP per capita is below pre-COVID levels and way behind the USA. Another effect of mass migration is on employment. Currently, Canada has to create 60,000 jobs per month just to keep its unemployment level from rising. So it's no surprise that Canada's unemployment levels have surged and they're now sitting above 6%. Now, growing unemployment is a sign that businesses are doing it tough, and that can be evidenced here by Canada's surging bankruptcy levels. And if employers start experiencing more and more pressure, it can be absolutely catastrophic to an economy. As unemployment rises, more people have less money to spend into the economy. That results in businesses receiving less income, so they have to reduce their expenses to stay viable. And to do that, they often lay off more employees, which leads to ever increasing unemployment levels. And if this starts to feed on itself, it could be disastrous for Canada's economy, but also for Canada's people. But the one thing that's so far protected the Canadian and the Australian economy has been ultra high house prices, because everyone who owns property has seen their overall wealth skyrocket as house prices have surged. And when people feel wealthier, they tend to spend more, which has had the effect of propping up the economy. But what if house prices in Canada and Australia didn't always rise by ridiculous multiples?
We have relied way too much on real estate in this country.
Right.
We are 4 times more geared to real estate up here than in the United States.
And when we look at household income to debt ratio, Canada's pretty bad, but Australia is one of the worst.
When you think about Canada, what do we got?
Really expensive homes and not a ton else.
And this is why Canada and Australia don't actually want to fix the housing crisis, because relentless growth in house prices has been their chief strategy for growing the economy over multiple decades now. And now those housing markets have become so absolutely massive that any real house price crash would result in economic carnage. And that's why the only solution being offered up by each nation's government is increasing supply or building more homes, because they don't really want to improve housing affordability. They just want to sound like they do.
Canada became a destination for wealthy people. And those types of wealthy people that are have a significant amount of wealth and have no problem dropping, I don't know, you guys live in Vancouver, you got them all over the place, $5 million homes that sit empty. And so all of a sudden Canada becomes a destination for international capital.
Boy, the similarities between these two countries are off the charts. They've allowed wealthy foreigners to get rich on a housing market that's hyperinflated due to government policies, while at the same time completely abandoning non-homeowners to the scrap heap.
You guys have no clue about what a real estate bubble pop. Go talk to your U.S. listeners, right? They know. They know what a real popping a real estate bubble is. We up here, we think Canada defies the laws of nature.
Trouble is, house prices have defied the laws of nature and grown way faster than wages for so long now that everyone just expects that to continue forever, which is why new home buyers are desperate to get into the market at any cost, because they fear if they don't, they'll be forever locked out of the market.
The other thing is, everybody up here is a property developer. Let me be honest, right? Everybody's got 3 or 4 properties. What happens on the washout?
Are you of the mind that we could be headed into a situation situation like that here north of the border?
That's why I've been the only one up here for 18 months saying get your money out of Canada.
Now, currently, there's so much demand for housing due to mass immigration that it's hard to see house prices crashing in the short term. However, you can't rule it out as both countries have seen ridiculous, unsustainable house price growth. So Canada is going through a housing crisis in conjunction with a cost of living crisis. This is resulting in surging levels of poverty and homelessness. Unemployment has risen sharply along with business bankruptcies. If unemployment continues rising, Canada could witness a severe housing crash which could collapse their entire economy. This is a huge warning for Australia, which have followed the exact policies that have created this disaster in Canada. I'm Biko Konstantinos.